buzzes with stimulating talk.
Having a great time listening to the radio here and just listening to everyone's comments.
This is News Talk 660 KFAR.
They have found an unjust and unwise jealousy to deprive a man of his natural liberty upon the supposition he may abuse it. George Washington.
They who would give up an essential liberty for temporary security deserve neither liberty or security. Benjamin Franklin.
The Constitution is not an instrument for the government to restrain the people. It is an instrument for the people to restrain the government, lest it come to dominate our lives and interests. Patrick Henry.
America will never be destroyed from the outside. If we falter and lose our freedoms, it would be because we destroyed ourselves. Abraham Lincoln.
I predict future happiness for Americans if they can prevent the government from wasting the labors of the people under the pretense of taking care of them. Thomas Jefferson.
Property is surely a right of mankind as real as liberty. John Adams.
The Constitution is a guide which I never will abandon. George Washington.
Welcome to the Saturday morning wake-up call right here on KFAR. It is hour one of the Patriots Lament show right here on Local Talk Radio. You can find us online at KFAR660.com. You can tell your friends down there in the lower 48 or actually anywhere in the world, but they can listen to us on the web, KFAR660.com. And you can also find us on your smartphone if your phone is smart. You can download the TuneIn Radio app. It's free. Of course, the service that you use to listen to us may not be free, so I personally suggest that you tap into somebody's Wi-Fi in order to listen to us on your smartphone. Yeah. And joining us, of course, here in the studio, Josh Bennett from Bighorn Enterprises. Good morning, Josh.
Good morning.
All right. So when you use Wi-Fi, do you use your own, or do you tap into somebody else's?
I stand outside of KFAR.
There you go. I gave you the password, didn't I? Oh. All right. Well, hey, welcome to the program. I'm Steve Floyd, the man with the face made for radio, and my job here is pretty much just to push buttons, Josh. So you...
That's my job, too. Push the buttons.
Push the button.
We were just talking about Brazil.
Yeah.
They are burning it down there. They need to listen to the show in Brazil, because we tell them, don't get a new government, just get rid of the one you got. I was talking to Claudio, a friend of ours, the other day about it, and he was just like, go, go, go. But what I think is fascinating about it is that, forget what I think. We've got a special guest here. Let's go to him.
You're just gonna stop in mid thought and go to the guest. Wow,
it's not very hard. My thoughts aren't.
All right. So we're welcoming to the program a special guest. Go ahead, and Josh.
Will, are you there?
I am. Is this Josh?
Yes, sir. Great. Thank you for calling in. We've been looking forward to this day for a long time.
Well, this is Steve.
I'm sorry to have been so elusive.
Nah, it's no problem.
Can you introduce yourself to the listeners?
My name is William Grigg, and I'm an independent journalist from Idaho. I used to be associated with the New American Magazine for about a dozen years. I publish a blog called Pro Libertate, and it's found at freedominourtime.blogspot.com. I try to update it between once and twice a week, and the essays are usually between 1,200 and 2,000 words, so it's not exactly a Twitter feed. If people read Pro Libertate, there's going to be something a little more substantive and longer-form journalism than what you'd find in a lot of blogs. A lot of what I write is republished at LouRockwell.com.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm also the host of a weekly radio program called Freedom Zealot Radio. at Liberty News, it's called Liberty News Network, but the name of the website that hosts this is libertyroundtable.com. And the network is called Liberty News Radio, and it does have a number of terrestrial affiliates. LibertyRoundtable.com, if you go there and look at the main page, up in the right-hand quadrant of the page, there's a Listen Live button, and it's broadcast from 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock Mountain Time every Saturday night.
Nice. I didn't know that. I'm familiar with that website, but I didn't know that you had a broadcast on there now. That's awesome.
That's Sam Bushman's website.
Yeah.
And he's quite a remarkable fellow.
Well, that's cool. I've been reading your stuff for quite a long time. I'm actually originally from Idaho.
Wonderful.
That does explain a lot.
Yeah. Grew up in Caldwell, but I'll tell you, our family went back to visit other family in the Napa Meridian area a year ago, and I'm pretty glad I left when I did. It's a lot different than it was 15 years ago.
Okay, yes, that much is certain. I think that what's happened is that there are certain parts of the state that have become Californicated.
Yes.
You're talking specifically about Sun Valley and the northern panhandle region of the state. And that's unfortunate, but there's a concomitant problem, which is that the Republican Party here has become more authoritarian.
Mm-hmm.
And Idaho is either widely praised or notorious for being individualistic in its outlook. Unfortunately, that's not true of the Republican Party in the state of Idaho, or anywhere else I can think of for that matter. It's returning to its roots. The Republican Party was founded by a bunch of German communists in Wisconsin, so it shouldn't surprise us the Republican Party has taken an authoritarian turn. But here in the Gem State, we're supposed to be one of the last redoubts of flinty-eyed frontier realism and individualism, and unfortunately that's not reflected in the dominant political culture here. So I can understand why you decided to flee northward from Idaho. I've been tempted to do so myself. I have relatives who live in Alaska, and I've visited that state a couple of times. I was quite smitten with it. I think anybody would be. But I've got other things that are keeping me here in the lower 48.
Oh, yeah. That's understandable, but it is pretty nice up here. But the authority, what you brought up with the Republican Party there, we have the same thing here where there was last year when the quote-unquote Ron Paul people took over the Republican Party in Alaska. Yeah. They got in their own leadership and all this and that. Well, the old hacks, they just nullified everything. They said, nah, none of those votes count now. And they kicked everyone out, and the old guard still runs it, which is not surprising. I mean, I'm not. We're not into politics, anyways. Basically, exactly. Definitely not the Republican. Well, any party, but the Republican Party, I think, it's done, and it's shown its true colors so well. I mean, President Lincoln would have been very proud of the party today from what he had back then.
They would consider that a compliment, which I think goes to the roots of the problem with the Republican establishment.
Exactly.
It's really difficult to confer a more stinging rebuke on somebody than to say that he lives up to Lincoln's expectations. Lincoln being, I think, the first modern totalitarian ruler. He was certainly cut from the same mold as a number of other centralizing politicians of the mid-19th, late 19th, early 20th century. I think that the communists are onto something when they've had Lincoln-Lenin days. They recognize them as the twin centralizers of the modern political state. And the Republican Party, I think briefly in the late 19th, early 20th century, did show some glimmers of potential in terms of repudiating its ancestry and becoming a more individualist-focused party, but I think whatever bit them they recovered from, unfortunately. By the mid-20th century, they were pretty much what they are now. Certainly when the Trotskyites took over party leadership positions in the 1950s, in order to beat back the dreaded Joseph McCarthy, that's where the grandparents of today's neoconservatives come from. And so I agree with you. I think that I would hope that anybody on the sunshine side of 40 would find nothing at all in the Republican Party to attract him or to attract her, and that people would start looking not only beyond partisan politics, but beyond politics as a way of organizing their lives and their relationships with other people. I think that we should become trans-political, and hopefully that's something that's happening.
It's definitely gaining some traction. Definitely. Because people like you and like you mentioned, Lou Rockwell, I mean, there's I hope that I'm not just imagining it, but it seems like there's a swell towards that side of things. It seems like there's more people that I hear are reading LouRockwell.com. Hey, have you ever heard of? And it's like, well, yeah, I've heard of them. How did you figure that out? That's a great thing. I mean, it's really great, especially because, well, one of the things that you like to write about a lot and that I admire you for, the last time we posted a blog about you, the heading was Badass for Liberty, Will Grigg. So we think very highly of you. And
that's very kind.
But you take it to the man, basically, to the state, and that takes a lot of guts because for people who don't know, you expose criminal behavior by the criminals in costumes and expose the daily violations that they do against the people. And the hard part of it is they get away with it over and over, and they make excuses. And even worse, 90% of maybe not 90, 90% of the American people go, oh, he must have done something wrong.
What you're describing there is what I call the attitude of punitive populism, where they instinctively sympathize with the person on the delivering end of aggressive violence if that person is clad in the habiliments of the punitive priesthood of the state. I've talked about something I call the Tom Joad test, and Tom Joad was not an entirely commendable character. He's from The Grapes of Wrath, and he was played by Henry Fonda in the movie. And right at the beginning of that book, in the beginning of the film, when Mr. Joad is returning home after spending time in prison, he uncorks a really interesting soliloquy that contains a sentiment I'll paraphrase here, that wherever there's a cop beating on a man with a nightstick, I'll be there. And the idea is that he would sympathize with the person on the receiving end of the beating. And that's supposed to be the American perspective. Whatever you think of Tom Joad as a character, or the novel itself is a somewhat populist Marxist reading of America's travails in the early 20th century, what he expresses there, what that character expresses, is the American view, which is that any time somebody who exercises this numinous, abstract quantity called authority is going to lay hands of violence upon another human being, he damn well better explain himself. You instinctively sympathize with the person on the receiving end of state-sanctioned violence, assuming, of course, that we're going to countenance the existence of this murderous fiction called the state to begin with. Yep. The person who's wielding this violence has to explain himself. And if he can't explain himself adequately, the idea is that you don't permit this to happen. And there are too many people who have embraced the contrary view, which is that the person who's on the receiving end of that violence obviously must have done something wrong in order to attract the malign attention of authority. And that's anti-American in the classic and reductive sense of the expression, because the American Republic, when it was a republic, I think it was a republic for maybe 2 or 3 decades, quite frankly, the American Republic was founded by people who didn't believe that the state as an abstraction, and they, of course, had different ideas of the state than I do, quite frankly, that the state has this right to inflict itself upon the governed. You know, that the government derives its just powers from the consent of the governed, and then when the government abuses those rights, then the people abuses those powers, rather. The people have the sovereign right to abolish that government. That comes admirably close to anarchism, the founding document of the American polity. But we've reached a point now where not only people are encouraged to think that somebody who's being beaten up by a cop or tasered by a cop or shot by a cop or being arrested by the FBI or being obliterated by a drone strike, that these people are to be considered malefactors by virtue of the fact that the state has killed or otherwise abused them. But they're encouraged to believe that if we have nothing at all to hide, then we have nothing to fear from being constantly surveilled by the government.
That's what the KGB said.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's the exact words the KGB used all the time. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear.
Exactly. And if we had nothing to hide, then we wouldn't need clothes or curtains.
Yep.
We wouldn't need wallets. We wouldn't need to have passwords to get into our bank accounts. Obviously, by virtue of the fact that we are people who, at some level, even the most statist among us, recognize the sovereign right to self-ownership, we recognize that there are things that are nobody else's business but ours. And most of those things are entirely innocuous, and they may have to do with weaknesses or liabilities or vulnerabilities, of which all of us are blessed or cursed with a plenitude. But the point is that all these things can be exploited and used against us by people who claim a monopoly on the legitimate use of force, which is all the government is. It's just a group of people who have given themselves license to commit aggressive violence against other people. They are the last people who should have any access to what we do. And if you have nothing to hide, you're a prisoner. Because the economy of a prison society is such that the people supervising the prisoners have plenary jurisdiction over everything they do. And what few rudimentary human decencies the prisoners enjoy are a gift of their jailers. So there are tens of millions of people in this country, and I've been following, as probably you have, this aggregator on Twitter where somebody is forwarding tweets where people have used some variation of the formula, I don't care if they surveil me, I've got nothing to hide. I think that that's a pretty significant sampling of the population. I do believe that there has to be a large plurality of the population that have internalized what you correctly describe as one of the KGB's most favorite memes, which is if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. Well, each of us does have something to hide if we own ourselves to some extent. But we've become a population of people who are willing to turn over the title to themselves entirely to the worst actors in our society, which are the people who presume to govern us.
What? And yet, if they obviously have stuff to hide, and if you expose that, you get called a traitor, and you might get hit by a drone at any minute.
Or if you get captured, you'll get executed on the spot.
Yeah.
Sure. Or at the very least, you'd be treated the way that Bradley Manning was, which was he was tortured for a better part of a year or longer because he had exposed war crimes. It's interesting that the Edward Snowden case follows seamlessly from the Bradley Manning case. And the Bradley Manning prosecution about a week ago made the fascinating claim that by making public the collateral murder video from 2007, where these Apache helicopter gunship crews who were part of the occupation force in a section of Baghdad killed between 12 and 18 perfectly innocent unarmed civilians and then wounded 2 little children. And then as the report of the children being wounded was made, one of the Apache helicopter crews said, well, it serves them right for bringing their kids into a battle zone, as if they had brought their kids to a battle zone. You see, the invaders had come to their neighborhood and turned it into a battle zone, but it's somehow the fault of the people living there when they get hurt. But when Bradley Manning exposed that, he supposedly did something that aided the enemy, because by exposing a war crime, for which nobody has been prosecuted by any rational metric, that's a war crime. It's a violation of the UCMJ. It's a violation of the Geneva Conventions. It's a violation of common decency. That's a crime. But by exposing the crime, he somehow aided the enemy, because presumably the state that rules us and those who do its bidding have an unqualified right to commit war crimes and to maintain the operational security necessary to commit war crimes. That's how far we've gone in terms of the official repudiation of even the semblance of the rule of law here. And with Edward Snowden, of course, you've got somebody who's exposing, among other things, the perjurious conduct of Mr. Clapper, who lied to Congress just a matter of months ago in denying what Edward Snowden, of course, documented. And Mr. Clapper, of course, is not going to be prosecuted for contempt of Congress or for felonious perjury. You have a government willing to prosecute Roger Clemens for allegedly lying about using steroids in ways that undermined the competitive purity of Major League Baseball. You know, they will pursue him from pillar to post. But Mr. Clapper brazenly lies about violations of the Fourth Amendment, among other things. And, of course, he's probably going to get his annual bonus and probably get a promotion. And the one who exposed that lie now is drone bait.
No, Will, I mean,
the American Soyuz.
I can see very clearly exactly why it would be a priority for Congress to prosecute someone who is making baseball less of a pastime. Yeah, I mean, you think about it, what serves the government better than to have something that distracts us all?
Sure.
You know, and if we get, oh, man, that sport's rigged. Oh, man, they've been cheating. I'm not into it anymore. Well, you know what? That right there, you know, what are we going to do? We're going to start paying attention to what the government does? We can't have that. We can't have that.
Yeah, that game's rigged too.
You know what? They ought to hang Roger Clemens right next to Snowden when they catch him. You know, I have heard so many people calling for this for Snowden's death.
Yeah,
I don't understand it. It's like we are a bunch of bloodthirsty, gladiator cheering. I don't know. We're savages.
Yeah, that's the putative populism at work, and it's one of the reasons, of course, why the founders of this country, for whom I don't have unwanted reverence. I mean, there are some insightful things that were said and done by most of them. Each of them at one time or another displayed that each of them was very human in terms of the corruptibility that is innate in each of us. But one of the things that they said by way of warning about democracy is the fact that democracy tends to promote this type of consolidation of power because, first of all, democracy is based upon participatory plunder, the idea being that you participate in politics in the hope of getting something through the coercive and extractive mechanisms of the state. And secondly, democracy, of course, is the natural element in which demagogues thrive. And I don't use that term demagogue as a teacher of the people. I'm talking about somebody who manipulates people by appealing to their baser emotions. And the basest of all emotions, of course, is this atavistic, reptilian, tribal collectivism that you see when people are encouraged to hate someone who is not one of us, who is no longer part of the body, or is somebody who is supposedly sufficiently different from us that the very existence of that person and people like him constitute a threat. Just yesterday, I was reading a column by Ann Coulter, which I did. I read her column primarily for anthropological reasons, I suppose. But she, in one line in this column about the, well, she was talking about the immigration issue, but she was somewhat lambently touching upon the issue of surveillance and drone killing and things of this sort. The headline was something to the effect that American citizenship doesn't mean what it used to. And she recited a laundry list of these people, almost all of whom were part of FBI false flag operations. The FBI's Homeland Security Theater Troop has these people who go out and identify and isolate target people to be brought into these scripts that are choreographed by the FBI. Then they bust the FBI orchestrated script and they advertise to the public another triumph of the Homeland Security state. It's literally like something out of East Germany or North Korea.
Yeah.
But she listed a number of these. And then she said something to the effect that America's enemies have always been foreigners, or if it weren't for foreigners, we would have no enemies. Now, this is the sort of thing, of course, that is sort of implicit in most of what you get from the authoritarian wing of the Republican Party, which is, of course, the largest wing of the Republican Party. The 2004 National Convention in New York City was a perfect example of this, where you had, once again, with almost North Korean precision, this ritual invocation of 9/11 and terrorism, a threat of terrorism, and so forth. The idea that we're always under siege. We're always victorious, but always under siege. You know, that's something Orwell described, of course. But Snowden, of course, has been isolated. It's really interesting. He somewhat confounded the Republican Party's state-worshipping, Homeland Security-worshipping element, because on the one hand, they want to consider themselves victims of what Obama's doing with this mechanism.
Yep.
And on the other hand, they want to embrace this mechanism because it's part of what defines their political outlook, which is the idea that we're at war with the seething, roiling mass of the entire Muslim world and any other foreign enemies that will be adduced to that quantity later. So they don't really know how to react to that. I've heard Mark Levin, and once again I listen to him primarily as an observer of abnormal psychology. But Mark Levin was talking the other night about the supposed material differences between Bush's warrantless wiretapping and what Obama is doing. He's trying to draw some kind of distinction of the sort that I suppose medieval era religious disputes were made out of, and there really is no substantive difference between what Obama is doing and what Bush was doing. It's just that Bush's version was more primitive and Obama's is much more wide-ranging, but Obama is standing up on Bush's shoulders doing exactly the same kind of thing.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, there's definitely a conundrum for the Republicans with that, because I unfortunately force myself to listen to Sean Hannity every once in a while, just so I can come on the show here and say, all right, here's what not to believe again. But you can tell that he's in a conundrum. He's like, well, I want to act like I'm a big constitutionalist, and yet we need to have these wars and, well, the surveillance. He has an internal struggle. You can tell that they don't know what to think, because this is Obama, but Bush did it. but we really do like it. I mean, look at McCain and McCain and Graham, the two most insane people on the face of the earth, I think, right now. They literally need to be checked in at the home. Those guys love. I mean, they not only love it, they want more.
It's sadomasochism. It is sadomasochism. They want to inflict pain on others, and they love the pain themselves. That's what it is. It is.
I don't know if it's so much that they're sadistic, or forgive me, that they're masochistic, as they are certainly sadistic because they complete happy immunity from the consequences, the policies that they're inflicting on us. If, for instance, the NDAA were to be applied even-handedly, John McCain would be in Gitmo right now or in a brig for his Memorial Day visit with al-Qaeda-connected Syrian insurgents, which is of a piece with everything he's done during at least the last couple of decades. For instance, he and I believe Lindsey Graham both supported the Kosovo Liberation Army, which was connected to al-Qaeda and which had been recognized as a terrorist group back in 1999 when the United States conducted the 78-day terror bombing of Belgrade and the surrounding cities there in Serbia in order to install this ally of Osama bin Laden as the government of Kosovo, which would be, in terms of how attached the Serbs are to Kosovo, it would be like turning over a combination of the Alamo and Jerusalem to people who are bane enemies of the evangelical Christian right, which worships both of these two cities. I mean, the Serbs are that much attached to Kosovo. And, of course, McCain and Lindsey Graham both have supported the People's Mujahideen, as it styles itself, in Iran, which is an Islamo-Marxist group, but it's really strange. There are such things as Islamo-Marxist groups. They're just allies of Washington rather than enemies of Washington. The People's Mujahideen back in the 1970s murdered American citizens before they helped precipitate the Khomeini Revolution. They were purged from the Khomeini Revolution in, I think, 1980 or 81. They spent the entire decade of the 1980s supporting the aggressive war that Iraq was waging on behalf of Washington against Iran. When I was in Washington, D.C. at the New Republic magazine in, I believe it was early 1988, I actually spoke with some people who were attached to the so-called People's Mujahideen because they were providing propaganda to the New Republic magazine, which was, of course, fiercely opposed to Iran. And they struck me as cultists then. I didn't know what to think of them. I at the time was employed by Fred Barnes, who was their senior editor.
Well, we got a 1-minute break. Can you stay with us?
I can.
All right.
Great, thank you.
We've got Will Grigg from Pro Libertate, and we've got more of Patriots Lament. Actually, this is hour 1, Saturday morning wake-up call.
Don't touch that dial. Fox News is here on KFAR.
Fox News Radio. I'm Lillian Wu. The judge in the George Zimmerman case blocking prosecution audio experts from testifying about screams heard in the background of a 911 call.
It sounds like a male.
And you don't know why?
I don't know why. I think they're yelling help, but I don't know.
Each side arguing their guy was the one screaming. The answer could help determine the aggressor the night. The former Neighborhood Watch volunteer says he shot Trayvon Martin in self-defense. Edward Snowden, who leaked details of an NSA program, officially charged with theft and espionage by the U.S., thought to be in Hong Kong.
An Icelandic businessman connected to the WikiLeaks anti-secrecy group has said he'll send a private plane to pick up Snowden if Iceland will grant him asylum. Presumably then Snowden's files would end up on the WikiLeaks website, which is something the Obama administration likely would want to prevent.
Fox's Amy Kellogg. Fox News. We report, you decide.
Hear the news unfold. News Talk 660 KFAR.
welcome back to the Saturday Morning Wake Up Call. This is hour one of the Patriots Lament Show here. On the line with us, we've got Will Grigg. Will, do you recognize that song we were just playing there for you?
I didn't. Forgive me.
It's Rage Against the Machine, their song. It's their cover of the classic Ghost of Tom Joad.
Oh, there you go.
I figured it would be appropriate since we were talking about punitive populism. And, of course, also the participatory plunder. You've got some great poppin' peas here today, Will.
It's a good thing I'm not speaking to a microphone. I think my plosives have probably shut it down.
That's great. That is great. I don't know. I'm sure you've seen what's going on in Brazil right now.
Yes.
It's semi-fantastic in some ways. What I think is so fascinating about what's going on in Brazil, this whole uprising, I'll say, started over a 20-cent raise over their public transportation. They raised the rate of a ticket, if you want to call it that, 20 cents. And hundreds of thousands of people came out and said, no, who do you corrupt rats think you are? And then the state, of course, does what it does best and started to shoot rubber bullets and, I guess, tear gas and all that great things that they do.
Sure.
So now they literally have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people protesting and trying to point out the fact that, no, actually, you guys are crooks. And Brazil's pretty well known of being crooked and their government's crooked. But it all started over a 20-cent raise in public transportation. And here in the good old U.S. of A., the rebellious Americans that we hear about on country music songs and we kick butt and blah, 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 but even though we're afraid of guys that eat rice and ride on goats with no shoes 5,000 miles away that could somehow float that goat across the ocean and kill us all, we sit here and get abused daily. Look at Boston. That was so tragic. I mean, no one said a peep. In fact, when they caught the kid and the siege of Boston ended, everyone was shouting, USA, USA. They're celebrating their own demise. And what a contrast from Boston in the 1760s and 70s when you had the Sons of Liberty and Samuel Adams demanding their rights. And with the British then, the occupying force wouldn't come walking around on the streets of Boston then. They had to stay out in their ships or they'll get taught a lesson. And here they sat in their houses, and I mean, I don't blame anyone for not resisting because they would be sufficiently killed.
Name it for what it is, though.
Yeah.
I mean, we may not be able to put up active resistance, but there is something very liberating about candidly describing something for what it really is. When you refer to a SWAT raid, you should call it a home invasion. When you refer to SWAT troopers, you should refer to them as stormtroopers. They're part of an Einsatzgruppen in the specific sense of the original German. They're a special task force. That's what the Einsatzgruppen were in Germany, and of course the Einsatzgruppen kill people more promiscuously than their American counterparts are so far. I hasten to qualify. But call these things for what they are. If a police officer puts hands of violence on somebody who's not a criminal suspect, then he's committing assault. He's not making an arrest. He's committing an abduction. Use proper language. And it's interesting that what's happening now with respect to this selective opacity that you described in the first segment, where their doings are completely off limits to our inspection, but everything we do is laid bare to them, is that police officers now, of course, are treating cell phones as if they're as dangerous as handguns because they recognize that documenting what they do is changing the way people look at them. And this, of course, constitutes a threat to that holiest of all social imperatives, which is officer safety. But if you simply describe something for what it is, that's something that has a tremendously liberating effect, not only on the person who's offering the description, but on at least some of the people who are listening to it. And what you're seeing in Brazil right now is the recognition on the part of a long-suffering population that they're ruled by criminals, and we're all ruled by criminals. I wish that we had sufficient clarity today in the United States to recognize this. You mentioned Boston and the build-up to the War for Independence. There was, on the part of the occupation force under King George III, a residual respect for the rule of law, which is why the government of King George allowed the British soldiers who were implicated in the Boston Massacre of 1770 to stand trial. And most of them were acquitted. And that's not to say that the exercise was useless. Is to say that it stands in sharp contrast to what happens today, where police officers are, you could round it up to never, held accountable for doing things that are far worse than what the British occupation troops did in occupied Boston, let alone what the federal agents do. I mean, when the FBI callously and obviously carries out an extrajudicial assassination of a material witness, of an alleged material witness to the Boston bombing conspiracy down in Orlando, we're fed an indigestibly implausible story, and we're supposed to swallow it and ask for a second helping.
Yep.
That's the sort of thing that wouldn't have flown back in the 1770s, and when America was inhabited by colonists who at least knew what it was like to be free.
I started to get a little glimmer of hope when it came out that the state was, and of course they were, but when the media found out that they were under investigation too. I mean, the all holy grail of media. What, you're investigating us? How dare you? I got a little hope then, because I thought, well, maybe it'll make these guys turn on their benefactors, but it's kind of gone away. Just like the deal with Snowden really is they're trying to push that under the rug by turning it immediately to the immigration bill. All the talking heads are just, surveillance stuff. Let's talk about the immigration bill now. Obama's going to kill us all because those people are coming across the border, which is just, they're doing a great job.
Perfect counter-programming for the populist right. Now, the perfect counter-programming for what elements of the left might start to doubt their attachment to their dear leader was Paula Deen once said something ugly about black people. And she's, of course, the distilled essence of all that we find repulsive about Southern conservative Christian culture. So let's obsess upon the manifold sins of Paula Deen for this news cycle. And that, of course, puts Edward Snowden in his disclosures and Michael Hastings in his likely state murder. That puts them in the rear view. And that's the whole idea. They just have to win the news cycle, one news cycle at a time. And suddenly that which was important and dangerous becomes long-forgotten history.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to ask you what you thought personally about the Hastings deal, because it's pretty odd.
Yes, from what I understand, and you probably covered this, he was looking into the Jill Kelly case, which is at the periphery of the David Petraeus surveillance and infidelity scandal. You know, he was consorting with a biographer. His biographer is one of these, how best to describe them, one of these affirmative action career military people whose best work was done not on the battlefield but in the bedroom in terms of career advancement. And he was, in spite of being the head of the CIA, under surveillance. As everybody is. That's one of the interesting things about the Russell Tice revelations, pursuant to what Edward Snowden has disclosed, is that we find out that the NSA is keeping what the Soviets used to call kompromat, which is dossiers based on surveillance of people in every department of government who might exercise oversight over the NSA. You're talking about judges, you're talking about members of the intelligence committees. There's at least one Supreme Court judge, apparently, who is being kept under surveillance and perhaps compromised. Glenn Beck has suggested that might be John Roberts, and that idea is not risible just because Glenn Beck has suggested it. Might be true, notwithstanding the provenance of that speculation. But what happened is that Jill Kelly was this socialite down in Florida who was caught in the periphery of the David Petraeus scandal because she and her husband were in the habit of holding these Augustan-caliber bashes for members of the Praetorian Guard there from CENTCOM. And she was involved in conversations of what was considered an inappropriate fashion with a field commander in Afghanistan. And so Hastings is looking to this, and this, of course, implicates the whole question of constant surveillance and the compromisability of people in positions of power. In the days leading up to his one-car accident, he had said that he was probably being kept under surveillance by the FBI, and that he had suggested to his friends that they be somewhat cognizant of the possibility that people might approach them to provide them with details about his background and associations. And then he suddenly dies in a genuinely bizarre one-car accident that was described by eyewitnesses as looking as if a bomb had gone off. And that's the sort of thing that, given the the rather fragrant set of circumstances would trigger the principal suspicions of a homicide investigator.
No. That happens all the time. One of the biggest dangers of driving a car is that it might spontaneously explode at all times.
Especially if it's carrying a troublesome journalist who succeeded in getting a high-ranking member of the special operations community fired from his post in Afghanistan. If this had happened in another country, if this had happened, let's say, in Russia, if you had a journalist similarly situated who had made the same kind of enemies, who was working on the same kind of story regarding surveillance by the FSB rather than the FBI, the people in this country, and neocons among them, would be saying this is probably the sort of thing that happens when you make the wrong enemies under Vladimir Putin. Well, Vladimir Putin, of course, is a reprehensible human being, former KGB officer. He's got the blood of at least tens of thousands of people on his hands. Not my ideal politician by any stretch of the imagination, but in terms of the way that he manages affairs in Russia, his government is less authoritarian than the one over which Barack Obama presides. It's not killing people by remote control halfway around the world. It's not routinely detaining people without due process. You know, you can actually in Russia, post-Soviet Russia, as a gun owner, you can buy anything your heart desires and keep it, and the government's not going to molest you about that subject. You know, it's really quite an interesting thing. We really have leapfrogged the post-Soviet Russian culture in terms of our own authoritarianism. They used to talk about convergence when I was in high school back in the 80s. They talk about the idea that at some point the United States is going to become more socialist and the Soviet Union is going to become more democratic, as the term was used, and will somehow meet on the supposed happy middle ground of democratic socialism. Well, screw that. The United States leapfrogged Russia, and we're full-blown authoritarian corporatism, and Russia is a gangster state, basically, but it's a less onerous one than ours because they don't have any ideological pretense about what they're doing. They're no longer engaged in campaigns to reshape the globe. They basically want to get their peace, and if you leave them alone with their peace, they'll leave you alone. That's not the way things operate here in the United States, as Michael Hastings probably found out.
Yep. Yeah, I was reading one of your stories here, it's a few weeks back, about 20 years ago or so. I think it was, what was the FBI director?
Louis Freeh.
Yeah, Louis Freeh. How can I forget that? I think I was 17 when the whole deal happened with at Ruby Ridge.
Yes.
Yeah, never forget that, Louis Freeh. So he, you were saying something about how he went to Russia or whatever, and he was comparing the two, what used to be the KGB with the FBI, and how they were. I'm tearing this up because I can't remember the whole story, but you basically thought, well, that's not very fair to align the FBI with them, and now you're saying, but wait a minute, 20 years later I'm looking at it and saying it's not fair for the Russians, giving them a bad name.
Exactly. The thing about the Russians, and I know a lot of Russians, and I don't know if in living in Alaska you can see Russia from your front porch the way Sarah Palin can.
I've tried.
Most of the Russians I know are vigorously anti-statist in their outlook. Not always in practice, of course, but one of the most memorable experiences I had was not with a Russian, but rather with an Estonian. He was my age. Obviously, he's still my age. I think he's still among the living. I hope so. He's a fascinating guy. I was on a plane coming back from Copenhagen, where I'd attended a United Nations summit and reported on it for the New American Magazine, and my seatmate for this 6-7 hour flight to New York was a young man my age as a businessman, and he was involved. This is 1995, bear in mind. He was involved in the wiring of that country for the internet, and to this day, Estonia is a more wired country than the United States, and of course, they're involved in Nokia and a lot of the other tech undertakings that have helped to create the wired world we live in. But he found out I was a journalist, and he asked what kind of journalism I practiced. I said political journalism, and I write for a publication called The New American. He said, well, unless it's anti-communist, I'm not interested in it. I said, you and I need to talk. He's somebody who dodged the draft in the mid-1980s. Of course, he would have ended up in Afghanistan. And he spent most of his time staying in the underground, so to speak, and living in the black market there in then Soviet-dominated Estonia. But talking with him, I came away with the impression that most of the people who had come of age in the late Brezhnev era in the Soviet Union and its environs were very anti-socialist in their outlook, and they had developed the antibodies, if you will, to collectivism that we don't have in this culture. Because we've never considered ourselves to be susceptible to collectivism, in spite of the fact that this has been a thoroughly collectivist government since no later than about 1933. But I think that most of the Russians and people from that part of the world with whom I've dealt have no illusion about the idea that central planning will work, and they have no illusion about what the state is. They understand that the state is a criminal undertaking. It's a criminal enterprise that has unchallenged monopoly jurisdiction over a given territory and has given itself license to commit crimes against those who are governed. Now, Americans did understand that, at least to some extent, during our founding period, and you can see at least a residue of that through the early years of the 20th century. And then Woodrow Wilson happened, and
Yep.
I think we've never recovered.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. It's just, it boggles my mind. I mean, on one side of it, you still have this residue. I think that people still have it somewhere in them with, like, a friend of mine, a friend of Steve and I's, who's from Brazil, and I had talked to him. I said, man, I'm thinking about getting out of this country. This place is going nuts. I mean, I had spoken with Richard Mayberry one time. He was a guest on our show, and we asked him, what do you think about leaving the country? He said, well, you know, it's not that bad yet, but when you start seeing summary executions on the street, you might want to think, yeah, we need to get out of here. When the law enforcement is the judge, jury, and executioner, well, that's happening.
Yeah.
And I was talking to my friend about that, and he said, there's something that you don't see, maybe because you're an American. He said, in Brazil, the word liberty we don't even talk about it. That's not even in our culture. There's nothing to it at all. He said, but here, a kid with baggy pants riding a skateboard go down the sidewalk, and if a cop stops him, he can get mad enough and say to that cop, leave me alone. I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm free. And he said, but nowhere else will they do that. And I've thought about that. So there's still some of that residual in American psyche or something. I don't know how to explain it, but there is something there. We still, unfortunately, we think we're free, which is the worst part.
Yeah.
When you think you're free, you're more hopelessly not.
I'm curious as to how much of that has to do with the public education system, because I think it's almost like we've been inoculated against true liberty by the little tiny bits that we get fed in the public education system that allow us to stand up against a cop to say, no, man, you can't tell me I can't skateboard. But then we'll all turn around, and if the cop says, get in your house if you want to live, that same person, okay, and we'll go and get in his house.
Yeah, they've redefined the threshold, I think, where people believe that if things are really important, we have to defer to the people who've created the mess in the first place. When they really screw up, for instance, and you have, at the most charitable assessment, we could say a huge system-wide failure of government on September 11th. They've screwed up. That means we have to give them all the power in the world in order to undo the damage that they caused to their own determined incompetence. That's the most charitable assessment of what happened on September 11th. If one accepts the official narrative, which I don't, but if one accepts that, the least you can say is that this illustrates the consummate uselessness of government. And yet people are led to believe that government is the only entity in human society that is entitled to get more power when it screws up. And that's part of the public school civics education you're talking about, where we're told that the government is somehow this transcendent element within our society that is somehow happily immune to the rules that govern everything else that we do. You wouldn't run a business that way. You couldn't run a business that way unless, of course, it was aligned with government. But when government does it, supposedly there is some supernal aspect to its nature that allows it to claim those kinds of powers. What's happening now in the government mind laundries is that they're no longer talking in terms of even these civics class bromides about liberty. That's why you have resource officers on hand to turn into crimes, to monetize as crimes, those episodes of trivial adolescent behavior that less than a decade ago probably would have been treated as just grounds for a talking to or an in-class suspension or something of that sort. You literally have these guys waddling through the halls of schools, junior high schools and senior high schools, and even elementary schools, and handcuffing kids for misbehavior and giving them criminal records. Now, that's a tangible civics lesson that's being taught now. What's being taught now, basically, is that the law doesn't apply to those people. The law is something used against you rather than something that protects your rights. You see, the American concept is that the purpose of law is to protect property.
Right.
That's it, in a nutshell. Beginning with you. What you are, what you have, that's yours. Now, what you've acquired through peaceful, mutually beneficial commerce or through legitimate inheritance, that's yours. The only purpose of law is to protect you and your stuff. What these new students are being taught now is that the purpose of law is to punish you when you do something that attracts his attention. So you must make yourself as inconspicuous and as compliant as possible, unless you want to end up being the person who's dragged out in handcuffs with a record now that's probably going to taint your prospects for employment as we move toward the polytechnic system that they put into place a couple of decades ago. And boy, the Common Core program is going to amplify this exponentially when they're able to use a more refined version of the NSA's comprehensive scrutiny in order to get everything they need to know about every individual in the system in order to make them compromisable. It's going to turn them in. The objective is to turn them into dutiful and utterly uncomplaining drones willing to put up with whatever is inflicted upon them by those who consider themselves to be their betters. So the civics class culture that we grew up with, even as bad as it was, they've abandoned that now. You know, they've gone full Stasi on us in the government schools, and we're going to be seeing the results of that, I think, within the next 5 or 6 years, and I'm not looking forward to it.
I was lucky enough to actually be homeschooled when I was a young lad in Idaho.
Oh, are you blessed?
Yeah, and we, my wife and I have 8 kids, and we are homeschooling them. We encourage, every time we're on the show, just about, take your kids out of the public school, folks.
Yeah.
It's your duty. It's the one thing you can do to help. People always ask, well, what can we do? Take your kids out of public school. That's a good start. I mean, I'm convinced that a child who can't read is better off being homeschooled than someone who's legitimately has all this book learning but goes through the indoctrination system of the state. It's just, it's horrible now. It's not a game anymore. It's not like, oh, you guys are making fun of the public schools, you know, well, their food's bad or whatever. No, it's an indoctrination center, and it's tearing at the very fabric of this whole country. The people now, I don't know, never mind, I'm getting frustrated.
Yeah, you're going to get yourself all fired up here, Josh. Will, do you have kids?
I have 6. My wife and I have 6 kids. Our oldest is 15, our youngest is 4.
And are they in the public school system?
Yes, I'm very anguished and ashamed to say that they are, for reasons that are rooted in some really difficult health problems that my wife has suffered that make it impossible for her to be their school teacher. They had been homeschooled up until the age of 8 or 9 or 10. And one of the things that I have to do, unfortunately, is a lot of damage control. And so it's really a hobby's choice in terms of whether it be better to be doing the additional work to school them at home or to be taking the additional time to do damage control. One thing I am proud of is the fact that both of my older sons, William and Isaiah, they're 15 and almost 14 respectively, they are notorious for being the uncooperative, skeptical, incorrigibly individualistic members of each class that they're in. They're constantly challenging what they're told, particularly with respect to such things as the civic affairs and political history. Isaiah and I were talking yesterday about the fact that he and another friend of his who's just as incorrigible as Isaiah is would gang up on their American history teacher about such things as World War II and Manifest Destiny and things of that sort. But I recognize this is really a suboptimal way to be raising them. If our circumstances were different, they'd have to be significantly different materially and with respect to my wife's health issues to do this. I would love nothing more than to be schooling them at home, and they would love nothing more than to be schooled at home as well. They really have fond memories of this.
I definitely would not want to be the public school teacher of the children of William Gray. Could you not put your hand up, please?
It's gotten to that point, I'm afraid.
That's great.
That's excellent. And well, you know, nobody would fault you or anybody else. And I know this is going out to our listeners who basically have told me that they feel like we are criticizing them for having their kids in the public school. You got to make the choice that is the best for you and your family.
Yep.
And just because we have made a choice, we homeschool our kids too, as well as Josh does. It doesn't mean that we are saying that's the only way to do it, or that if you're not doing it that way, that you're wrong. We are simply pointing out that you do have choices, that you're not trapped, that you don't have to do what the government tells you to do with your kids.
Yeah.
And we, and our heart goes out to somebody like you, Will, who feels like you don't have any other options.
Well, there are plenty of people who are sharing that predicament with me, and I talk with a lot of them, and it's something that we recognize as a real danger. I mean, not merely in terms of the really important question of what goes into the minds of the children over whom we give a stewardship, but it is a physical danger to families.
Yeah.
Because the system is designed to break them up. It's designed to turn siblings against each other based on arbitrary class and peer distinctions. And it's designed to make people part of the seamless web of social regimentation.
Plus, the kids are encouraged to report on their parents.
Yes, that's, of course, the Pavlik-Morozov syndrome. Was your father a kulak? Oh, that's what DARE is all about. And I'm happy to say that we helped get DARE abolished here in Payette. So we don't have that to worry about. But William was the last to go through the DARE program, and he was a disruptive influence there. And then a year and a half later, we don't have a DARE program. So you draw your own conclusions. But the whole purpose of DARE is to turn kids into Pavlik-Morozov-style informants within the home. It's execrable, but that's very much a part of what's going on.
It's amazing. I mean, we're living in 1943 Nazi Germany, and we have our eyes closed. And it's happening to us.
All right, Will, really quickly, do you have contact information for it?
freedominourtime.blogspot.com is the name of the blog. It's called Pro Libertate. You can go to, I wouldn't recommend Google anymore, go to Start Page and look up Pro Libertate or William N. Grigg, or go to freedominourtime.blogspot.com. There's a PayPal button there.
You're definitely welcome to stay with us for the next hour, but if you have to go, we understand. Thank you very much, Bill Grigg.
Fairbanks is listening. 660 AM, KFAR, Fairbanks.
Fox News Radio. I'm Ron Flatter. Was it the gunman or the victim who was screaming the night an unarmed teenager was killed last year in Florida? Audio experts might have their opinions about a recording of it, but in a written ruling posted today, a judge says
Go from us in peace. We ask not your counsels or your arms. Crouch down and lick the hands which feed you. May your chains set lightly upon you, and may posterity forget that you were our countrymen. Samuel Adams.
The time is near at hand, which must determine whether Americans are to be free men or slaves. George Washington.
And what country can preserve its liberties if its rulers are not warned from time to time that this people preserve the spirit of resistance? Let them take arms. The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. Thomas Jefferson.
Posterity, you will never know how much it cost the present generation to preserve your freedom. I hope you will make good use of it. If you do not, I shall repent in heaven that ever I took half the pains to preserve it. John Adams.
I sincerely believe that banking establishments are more dangerous than standing armies, and that the principle of spending money to be paid by posterity under the name of funding is but swindling futurity on a large scale. Thomas Jefferson.
Government is instituted to protect property, this being the end of government. That alone is a just government, which impartially secures to every man whatever is his own. That is not a just government, nor is property secure under it, where arbitrary restrictions, exceptions, and monopolies deny to part of its citizens the free use of their own faculties. James Madison.
It would be an absurdity for jurors to be required to accept the judge's view of the law against their own opinion, judgment, and conscience. John Adams.
Whenever the legislators endeavored to take away and destroy the property of the people, or to reduce them to slavery under arbitrary power, they put themselves into a state of war with the people, who are thereupon absolved from any further obedience, and are left to the common refuge which God hath provided for all men against force and violence. John Locke.
It is in vain, sir, to extenuate the matter. The gentleman may cry, peace, peace, but there is no peace. The war has actually begun. The next gale that sweeps from the north will bring to our ears the clash of resounding arms. Our brethren are already in the field. Why stand we here, idle? What is it that gentlemen wish? What would they have? Is life so dear, or peace so sweet, as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but for me, give me liberty, or give me death. Patrick Henry.
My people perish for the lack of knowledge. God.
Some people you can never please. You might as well just let them be. They mock everything not their own from their imaginary throne. But I won't bow down even if the whole world thinks I'm crazy. So hey, this song is for us. So put your hands in the air if you're crazy like us.
And welcome to Patriots Lament right here on KFAR. We are a local talk radio, 660 on your AM dial, but we're also live on the internet at KFAR660.com. I'm Steve Floyd, the man with the face made for radio. I am basically a hired hand. I want people to understand that. I'm not the host of this program. I am not any kind of creative force behind this program. People sometimes associate me with this program because I'm here and you hear my voice.
We're sorry,
but
Steve.
No, it's good. It's very good, and I'm proud to be a part of it. But I just wanted to point out that this show is the brainchild and the production of the Bennett brothers. And joining us here in the studio today, of course, as always, Josh Bennett from Bighorn Enterprises. Good morning, John.
Good morning. Man, after that guy, Will Grigg couldn't stay with us, but we have what I believe is just as good, our good friend Jim.
Jim from
one of our favorite guests.
Jim from Kenai. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Good morning. Wow, it was great to hear Will.
Yes, it was. Thank you for putting that together and
absolutely.
Through all the trials and tribulations that you went through to make that happen. Appreciate it.
Oh, it's just bugging Will. He's got a lot going on in his life. If you enjoyed, as a listener, if you enjoyed Will's encyclopedic knowledge of recent and distant history, check out his blog. And he is one of the, we're blessed in that at this point in history, we have a lot of independent journalists doing liberty-minded work. We've got your show, and we've got Will and LRC and Future Freedom Foundation and antiwar.com, and we've got all these places. A lot of these places are going it on a shoestring budget, and Will is completely independent. If you've got two nickels to rub together, and you enjoy Will's blog, which you should, if you go there, you might consider hitting the donate button and dropping him one of your nickels, because he needs it, and he's definitely a resource in the liberty community. If you aren't going there, you should.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. That's sweet. For sure.
A mutual friend of ours pointed out an incredibly good article that addresses the whole issue of punitive populism that Will keeps bringing up. And if you're listening and you go to Google and you don't mind the NSA watching, you type in the public demand for force as your search, and the first hit will be an article by Mike Roseff. And he is one of those writers who every time I read him, I come away with some new insight, or at least one. And his logic is wonderful. He's a Christian man. He's just got profound insights into what's going on. And this article explains a lot of what we see and why particularly Christians are so susceptible to the calls for force in society. And then he talks about the mutually reinforcing cycle of wanting to use government force, and then that government force actually pulling the society down into being a more barbaric society. And it's just full of insights. People really should read it and take it to heart and look at the number of places that they themselves are calling for the use of force against their neighbor. And it would if it doesn't convict your heart, then I don't know. Then that's a hard thing.
You're a statist piece of junk. That's what.
No. Don't be too pejorative, because I know a lot of folks who are just beginning their journey away from statism. I mean, it's hard when you've been birthed in statism, when you've been, thoroughly salted with it through your entire life. When your parents, who through I'm going to say limited fault of their own. Because I think every parent has a responsibility to intercede for their child and not allow them to be turned into, zombies. But I think that, you grow up with your parents wanting to do what's best for you, maybe feeling inadequate to take your kids out of school. It used to be illegal. I know in Arizona, when I grew up, the idea of homeschooling, it was actually against the law. And the people that I know that did it back then were looked upon as freaks, because they were, as separatists, as troublemakers. This is the whole. It's really hard to live in a community when everybody's pointing their finger at you and saying, "Look at the freak going by."
Yeah.
And so your parents put you into the public school, and next thing you know, you're sitting through 6 to 8 hours a day of indoctrination. You're going to get indoctrinated. It's going to happen. No matter how individualist you are, no matter how strong you think your kid is, no matter how intelligent, no matter how much of an independent thinker, at the end of the process, you're going to have a statist come out on the other side. And when I say statist, I'm not just talking about a person who believes in the ultimate power of the state. I mean a person who actually worships the state and may not even realize they're doing it. So don't be too pejorative against somebody who has their kids in the public school. They should be prayed for, maybe pitied, but certainly not pilloried.
Okay.
I'm kind of stuck on the P's now after Will.
Yeah, Jim, I'm just stuck with the, when I said you're a statist pig or whatever. It's because the reason I used whatever word I did, evil statist, is because I want people to realize that it is bad.
Yeah.
It is that bad. What you're asking for, what you're supporting, what you're calling on is evil. It's bad. It's not just like this, well, who's going to get elected? It's horrible. What you statists are holding up. It's murderous. The state kills people. The state steals from people. And every time it does it, it gets a little more power and goes for more and kills more and steals more and kills more and steals more. We've got to come to the realization that it has to end. So why don't we? Why are Americans so enraptured with the state?
Because people see the short-term payoff of getting to force other people to bend to their will.
I knew you'd come up with something easy. Gosh.
No,
you're right.
When you look back through the Bible, you see, David complaining about the wicked prospering in the short term, and the prophets, the law and the prophets. It's all about, don't worry about these people; they'll get their own. Mm-hmm. It will come. God will take care of you. Eventually, justice will be done. But justice is ultimately not your problem. But we want to see that justice now. So we don't. Ultimately, it comes down to a lack of trust in God. God isn't going to do it. I need the state to make things right for me, and then your trust turns from God to the state.
And the state becomes your God.
And then the state becomes your God.
Josh, last week you posted on a link on the Patriots Lament blogspot that I saw that I really enjoyed. The link to LouRockwell.com. You might be guilty of military idolatry. This is the kind of thing that, when people hear it, and when you think about it, this is where you begin to realize, wait a second, am I actually an idolater and don't realize it? I think I love God, but I'm actually sacrificing to idols? And if you think about it, can I read some of this?
Oh, yeah, please do.
All right, here. If you believe that you're a Christian, but you might be guilty of military idolatry, here's how you find out. If you send a care package to a U.S. soldier but not to a missionary. If you thank a veteran for his service but not a pastor, priest, deacon, or minister. If you can recite the Pledge of Allegiance but not the Ten Commandments. If you value serving your country more than serving your fellow man. If you sing the national anthem at a sporting event with more enthusiasm than you sing a hymn in church. If government welfare spending bothers you but not government military spending. If anti-war rallies make you mad but cadences recited in basic training don't make you blush. If you shed more tears singing patriotic hymns than hymns of worship about the person and work of Christ. If you get more excited about U.S. soldiers killing Muslims overseas than U.S. missionaries preaching the gospel to them. If you pray for the troops more than you pray for the furtherance of the gospel. If you can sing patriotic songs without looking at a songbook but have to look at one to sing hymns of worship. If you compare the death of a U.S. soldier killed in combat to the death of Jesus Christ for the sins of the world. If the murder of American unborn children by American doctors upsets you more than the murder of foreign children and adults by American soldiers. It goes on to suggest to a Christian how you can know if your church is guilty of military idolatry, but I think I'll let just people go and look that up on their own at LouRockwell.com.
Yeah.
And there's a link once again at the Patriots Lament blogspot, which is... Where did it go? Hang on a second. patriotslament.blogspot.com. Okay. Easy enough, isn't it?
Jim's a new contributor to it, too.
When I was
actually going to be worth reading.
When I was coming out of the military idolatry stage, the nationalist fervor, a friend of mine in my Boy Scout troop said, "What is wrong with us that we can't find something more important for our children to do than to go into the military? Where are all the missionaries?" And I was offended at it at the time, but I recognized that my initial emotional response was wrong, and it took me a while to reconcile that with the fact that I was a military idolater, even though I was a libertarian Republican. It's like, wow, the indoctrination was deep. It was, and I had adopted it wholeheartedly. I had thrown myself into it, but that observation that we don't have missionaries coming out of our churches anymore. We've got soldiers. Wow.
Yeah, no kidding.
Well, I appreciate it, guys. I'm going to go.
Thanks,
and listen.
Jim.
Are you? Okay.
Praise
that things are changing a little bit here in this town. Even Michael Dukes had one of the big cheeses from the Mises Institute on his show, I think last Wednesday. I thought, times they are changing.
That's excellent. And you know what? Kudos to him for having the Mises guys on. Jim, thanks for the call. Appreciate it. 458-TALK is the number. You want to take some let's get some phone calls this morning. Good morning. All right, and they both they got on the phone there. Well, Jim, maybe they just didn't want to talk to us. They wanted to talk to Jim.
Thanks, Jim.
All right. I've been really... I love the way that Will put that last hour, Will Grigg, when we had on the first hour, punitive populism and participatory plunder, these things which make part of our American life. We've come to accept now that texting while driving is some kind of horrible crime for regular people. But did you hear about what happened in Anchorage, where a cop was distracted while he was driving because he was looking at his screen, didn't realize he ran a red light, T-boned a guy, completely not just obliterated the guy's car, but obliterated the guy's back. He was a military pilot who was forced out of service because of his injuries, and the jury down in Anchorage just awarded the fellow who was struck by the cop $375,000 for the actual medical bills, but they declined to give punitive damages that he was also seeking, I think, a couple $1 million against the city of Anchorage, because, and I think this is where it comes to that issue of the punitive populism, that even though the cop was wrong, even though the cop was doing something that anybody else caught doing would be sent to jail for, in terms of not having his eyes on the road, the cop is not being held accountable for what he did. Even the jury basically saying, yeah, we'll take care of your medical bills, really so sorry that it happened to you, but you know what? The guy's a cop.
He must have been doing something wrong.
Yeah, by driving there in the cop's way, when the cop had to run that red light because he wasn't paying attention.
Now, it goes back to what we talk about all the time here, is that there's no recourse for the citizen. There's no recourse against the state. I was going to talk about that.
You want to get to this one, too?
There's no recourse. They make the rules. They decide how much it costs for their protection. And when they fail to protect you, there's no recourse against them. If they actually injure you, there's no recourse against them. Just like one of Will Griggs' stories here just recently. An FBI, I think he was FBI. Anyways, a law enforcement officer, they busted into a house about midnight, and one of the officers ended up killing a 7-year-old kid with his MP5. And he said, basically he put the blame on the grandmother that was there. He said, well, she kind of swiped at my gun, and, it was my gun that shot. He said, but I don't remember pulling the trigger, but blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Anyways, the whole thing is... Well,
he put the blame onto the inanimate object,
right.
The gun.
And he blamed the citizen of the house that he broke into at midnight. And the whole thing was they were looking for someone. Well, instead of doing a stakeout and watching and waiting, like the whole thing with David Koresh, instead of just picking them up when they saw him, no, we're going to wait so we can break in the house and play fun games with our guns. And then the little kid gets killed, and nothing's going to happen to him. He's still on the force. It's sick.
Well, I feel much safer having people like that on the police force, knowing that they're going to shoot my kids if they break into my house to arrest me for some made-up crime.
Yeah, and people ask, well, if we didn't have them, in the society that you always talk about, if we didn't have that, then, I could go and kill your kids, and I'd kill your wife, and I could kill everybody, and that's not quite true, because even with the state, that happens every day. People's wives get killed, and their kids get killed, and the state shows up after the fact, and says, well, we'll investigate. Good thing we're here, because now we can investigate. If it wasn't actually a cop that came and killed your kids in the first place. So they're going to investigate it, but it comes down to if you're going to protect yourself, if the real protection for your wife and kids is yourself. Whether there's a state or not a state, the protection's yourself. And now, it's going downhill. By the day, the supposed Bill of Rights, Steve and I were just discussing the Supreme Court has now said that to invoke the Fifth Amendment, you actually have to say that you're pleading the Fifth because your silence isn't good enough. Now the Supreme Court says that if you remain silent without invoking the Fifth Amendment, actually saying, I'm invoking my Fifth Amendment privilege not to incriminate myself, you are presumed guilty.
So basically, in order to have the right to remain silent, you have to break your silence.
Right. So now silence. The Supreme Court has said that silence itself proves guilt.
Which flies in the face of the Constitution. Does anybody get this? Okay, we have gone through the looking glass, Josh.
Bush appointees voted for it.
Oh, and this is the Supreme Court. People say, oh, well, we need to elect a conservative so that they can appoint the right Supreme Court justices. It's your appointees, conservatives, who did this.
Yep.
What was the whole point of reading somebody their Miranda rights?
Well, that's a whole other issue itself too, because remember when that kid got caught with the Boston bombings, they said, "Well, we're not going
to Mirandize him."
Yeah, we're going to be able to. We can torture him now because we didn't Mirandize him, so he doesn't have any rights until we tell him. And that actually that says it all.
Yeah.
You don't have rights unless the state gives it to you. That's exactly what they're saying.
And yet the whole point of the Miranda case was that the guy did have rights that were obliterated by the way in which he was tortured by the police, Miranda I'm talking about, until he confessed to something that he didn't do. And so when his case was eventually overturned, it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and they came back and they said, just to be clear, you have a right to remain silent. That's what the Fifth Amendment is all about. When somebody says, I plead the Fifth, what they're telling you is, I'm not going to talk to you, and I want to remind you, you statist pig, that I don't have to talk to you.
Yep.
But no.
No, you're guilty now if you don't.
And even if you say nothing, You do not have a right to remain silent.
One of the things that Will said that is spot on, I think we've talked about this before, and I can't exactly remember who. I think it was Adams that talked about it in one of his writings anyways. But the whole thing is that we suppose today that we have liberties and freedoms because of the law. That's absolutely backwards. Law came about because of liberties and freedoms. Liberty and freedom was first. Law came second. Law came to protect the liberties. You didn't have law, and because of this wonderful thing called the state, now you have freedom. It was the absolute opposite. And he kind of mentioned it with the Founding Fathers. Unfortunately, they didn't get it right because they decided, well, we need a constitution and let's set up a central government. That'll protect us.
Well, and that one of the central debates, if you go back and read, I know you have to read. What a horrible thing we're asking people to do. Think for yourself and read a little bit.
Can you get on a podcast?
And you go back and read the Federalist Papers. One of the big debates was whether or not you needed a Bill of Rights versus a Constitution.
Yep.
The whole point being is that what they put together was supposed to constrain the government from overpowering and destroying a person's natural rights. Rights which came from what? From where?
God.
From God. So why do you have a right to remain silent? Because God gave it to you. Why do you have a right to keep and bear arms? Because God gave you the right to self-defense. Why do you have the right to freely associate with whoever you want to? Because God gave it to you. It's not because it's written down somewhere. And the whole point of a Bill of Rights in the first place, and what the people were arguing for in the face of the Constitution, saying, no, we don't want to set up a framework for government to come in and protect us. We want to make sure that we are protecting the people from the government.
Yep.
And why they wanted that Bill of Rights in the first place instead of a Constitution. And by the way, didn't Virginia have that?
Yes. Actually, the Bill of Rights came from the Virginia Bill of Rights for the most part.
Exactly.
Mason?
That sounds familiar. Frank Journey, I'm sure, will call in.
Either Frank or what's our good friend out in the Salt Delta? Oh, anyways, we're getting
the point being this is that right now our Supreme Court doing exactly what they do best, being supreme.
Mm-hmm.
They have decided the law for us. The Fifth Amendment has been stricken from the Bill of Rights.
Yep. There is no Bill of Rights. You know, one of the reasons that they fought about the Bill of Rights in the Federalists and Anti-Federalists was they were saying, "Why we don't need a Bill of Rights. We know what our rights are." But the Virginians, actually it was the Virginia delegation, was like, "Oh no, you scumbags. We know what that means. We're going to have a Bill of Rights written down." And then they're like, "Well, if we do that, then the government can take them away because it's on paper and they can add and subtract." And they said, "No, this is going to be set in stone because these are our natural rights. This has nothing to do with government. These are our natural rights, unalienable, as they call them, which meant they couldn't be touched."
And you're supposed
and yet
to,
some men say, yeah, they're gone.
Well, and this is why we had the three branches of government. I mean, you got to keep in mind, if the Congress came out and passed a law that was in contrary to what the Bill of Rights or what the Constitution said, the Supreme Court, the court system, and it was supposed to be, I mean, the whole idea is primarily juries, not these appointed judges, these rulers for life. The court was supposed to be able to step in at that point and overrule the legislature, going back to that idea of, no, we are constrained. The government is constrained from doing this. If, for some reason, the executive branch oversteps its bounds and starts doing something that goes contrary to the law or to Congress, then Congress is... But I mean, the whole point of checks and balances is gone as well.
No.
Now we've got the president making up law, which the Supreme Court upholds.
We have a centralized government. We have one state.
It is. It is. Bow down before the one you serve. You know what's going to happen if you do that?
Going to get what you deserve.
That's right. Head like a hole. All right. We got less than a minute to go, Josh, before the break here at the bottom of the hour. All four lines are on hold.
We'll come to you guys. Stay on the line.
We promise
Don't diss us.
Exactly that we will go to the phones in just a moment right here on KFAR. It's Local Talk Radio, 660 on your AM dial. By the way, we are on your smartphone with the free TuneIn Radio app, so make sure you check that out for yourself at TuneIn Radio. You can download it free, but it does cost, depending on your plan, whether you have a data plan or whatnot. So check that out. And keep it here for more of Patriots Lament. Right after the Fox News, here at the bottom of the hour, we got to have our government propaganda contractually.
Keep it here for Fox News next on KFAR.
Fox News Radio, I'm Lillian Wu. Some opponents of the Syrian president have agreed to give urgent military support to Western-backed rebels. Secretary of State John Kerry in Doha.
Assad chose to raise the stakes militarily. He chose to attack the Syrian people, but this time using Iranian supporters and using Hezbollah.
Kerry not offering specifics on the assistance, but saying it would help change a balance of power on the battlefield. And in the George Zimmerman trial, this call will be allowed to be played.
911, do you need police, fire, medical?
Maybe both. I'm not sure. There's just someone screaming outside.
What the judge is not allowing is expert testimony for the prosecution on who may be screaming in the background. The information could be crucial because Zimmerman claims he killed Trayvon Martin in self-defense. Fox News, we report, you decide.
Local Talk Radio, KFAR, with a clear perspective on what's going on in the world, whether it's overseas or down your street. Tune in for the latest developments anytime, day or night. 660 AM, KFAR.
Welcome back to Patriots Lament right here on KFAR. Joining us in the studio, as always, from Bighorn Enterprises, we have Josh Bennett. Good morning, Josh. You ready now to go to the phone, sir?
Yeah, I want to say real quick, another thing that's in that Bill of Rights, in the Fifth Amendment to the Bill of Rights, it also says at the very end there that no property shall be taken from a citizen for public use without just compensation.
So how does that fly against what the borough just is discussing doing right now?
Where they're saying that if you don't pay your property tax, instead of putting it on the market or on the chopping block and selling it, then whatever proceeds is over the taxes that you owe, you get the rest of the proceeds. They're saying that, well, they're actually discussing this. Let's, we'll just take the land for public use, and the owner of the land will get nothing in return. So that flies in the very face of the United States Constitution, Amendment 5 to the Constitution. Why are those jackholes over there even discussing it? Why do they even have it come up on a board to talk about? They're so stupid over there. The oath that they took to their Constitution, they don't even know what it means. Because in the Fifth Amendment to the Bill of Rights nullifies what they're talking about doing. They have no authority to do it.
They may have, taken an oath to the president or taken an oath to the state as opposed to the oath to the Constitution, because they obviously don't know what the Constitution says.
They're idiots.
That too.
They're statist pigs.
You statist pig! 458 Talk is the number. Here we go. Good morning, caller. You still with us?
Yeah.
Who is this?
It's Carl.
Carl, what's on your mind?
Well, okay, I got two things currently, a topic. Basically, if government is supposed to, like, protect your rights and your, pursue happiness, your liberties, well, there's two things that kind of struck a chord with me. You put your money into a savings account, and basically, if you look at it rationally, you may not be saving anything by putting it in a savings account if there is more inflation, more government taxation than what you're getting in return for your savings. But
zero interest rates.
As far as what I kind of agree, but kind of differ in a way about the Fifth Amendment and the right to remain silent. How about they tell you and tell the jury, your peers, what you're being judged for, your constitutional right.
Well, that was the whole point of Miranda.
Well, I'm saying in court, there are people like this one lady who was connected with that Schaefer character, Schaefer Cox. She was busted for carrying a weapon.
Right.
Which was her constitutional right. Regardless of these political laws regarding felons and possession of firearms, there are certain, Bill of Rights. You have a right to, she gladly gave it up. I don't know what she's doing going across the border with a 38 special or something, but I'm just saying that when people are judged, what are you judging against? Political fascism or this Constitution and the Bill of Rights in which we have? When when government backs banks who are supposed to be saving your money and they don't actually save your money, but they spend it for you for other causes and don't give you a rate of return. Or
Carl, are we coming near a point? Well, do you have a map or something? Because we need to take a turn at this point. Either get to the point or get off the phone.
Well, that's just it. I could disagree with you about saying, well, the Fifth Amendment right is something that you should know. But if people don't know it and they need to be educated about it, if they're read it while they're being arrested, why aren't they read it while they're in court? Why isn't the jury
told the right? I'm following you, and that's actually probably the best question I've heard you ask for.
Thank you, Carl.
It's really good. Why aren't they? Because the state doesn't want you to be found not guilty.
And it's not just a matter
of... Its purpose is to prosecute.
Well, there's two parts of it. Part of it is revenue for the state, and part of it is control. Because, you know what, they'll make an example out of one person to keep the rest of us in line.
Yep.
All the time.
Oh, yeah.
A great example is this thing with Snowden. How they've put charges against him in a secret court, by the way, which have now been sealed, which basically charging him with treason, which is an executable offense. One of the few things, you can go out and murder a whole bunch of people and you may never see the outside of a jail cell again, but you're not going to die for it.
And the president says that he can be judge, jury, and executioner. You don't have to be found guilty. You just have to have the assumption of guilt.
We found Snowden. Let's go hit him with a drone, and the rest of America cheering.
Oh, he's admitted he's guilty, though.
He is guilty. Absolutely. He is guilty of being a criminal against the state. And the state is wrong.
Yep.
And everybody knows that what has gone on in the Snowden case, everybody knows that by the government invading your privacy, by snooping into your phone records, that the government is not just ignoring, but trampling on the U.S. Constitution.
Snowden is actually, for all real intents and purposes, a hero.
Yeah.
He is not a traitor. He's a hero of his people. That's the way he should be looked at, not the way that the state is vilifying him for.
What does Amendment 4 say there? This is the U.S. Constitution, Amendment 4, part of the Bill of Rights.
The right? Oh.
No. Just read it in your normal.
The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. No warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Ratified December 1791.
So the very fact that we have now, all of us, willingly participated in the abandoning of the Fourth Amendment. Every time you go to the airport and you voluntarily let them search you, I guess you've just decided, well, this is a reasonable search.
Yep.
By them taking away whatever, oh, I'm sorry, you've got too much water in your bottle. We're going to confiscate the bottle. Oh, well, I guess that is a reasonable seizure of my goods and my
the right of the people to be secure in their persons. No warrant shall be issued. That's one of the problems with this whole NSA thing, is that they have a secret court that basically allows the investigators that are listening to decide whether it's probable cause or not without getting a warrant.
And they're already listening without a warrant. They're already out there observing, watching. This is like Stasi Germany. Yeah. And I'm talking, that's East Germany for people who don't know. That's the communists. This is like Nazi Germany. This is like 1984 by George Orwell. And the American people apparently don't care.
And in Brazil, when you raise the price for public transportation by 20 cents, hundreds of thousands of people take to the street in protest.
And in Turkey, when they threaten to go and knock down a couple of trees in a park, hundreds of thousands of people show up to protest.
And here, when people protest, the rest of the people look at them and say, throw them in jail. They got what they deserve. And the police go around with mace and pepper spray and go right up to their face
people
and
who
spraying,
are sitting
on the ground. Peaceful demonstrations. What a bunch of scums.
You statist pig.
Statist pigs.
458-TALK is the number. Good morning, caller. Who's this?
Yeah, good morning.
Hope
Frank
that wasn't
Journey.
a statist pig that hung up.
No, I don't know. It might have been.
Frank, how's it going, brother?
You still there, Frank?
Yeah, good morning.
Hey.
Yeah, wow, another awesome show. Your first guest gave me more healthy brain food for thought. What was his name?
Will Grigg.
Wow.
Grigg.
Well, I really appreciate the show. And, you mentioned the Fifth Amendment. I got an announcement name. But first, the Fifth Amendment. We did have checks and balance in there. I brought this up the other day when Mark Begich was on. Evidently didn't hear my full conversation, but thank you, Steve, for clarifying it. But we have two functions of the grand jury. One's indictment, and the other one's presentment that our elected officials never tell you about, our governor never mentions, or any of these lawyers. And that presentment, that's when the grand jury independently can investigate government abuses and officials.
Yep.
And that's one of our founding fathers put that in there, is a checks and balance against government.
Yeah, and unfortunately, though, that takes the will of the people to enforce it.
Right. Well, we got them Supreme Court judges up there wearing those funny costumes and the black robes spitting out white lies. If you look at many of the decisions is 5-4, 5-4, 5-4. And look at the ones that we put in there. Of course, we don't have any choice about the Supreme Court.
Yep. Well, and look at the people. They're all corrupt and crooked, but it was the Bush appointees that just nullified the Fifth Amendment, and it was actually an Obama appointee that stood up for it.
Abomination.
Yeah.
My announcement is, thanks to Stacey Pearson for her heading that group to end Monsanto, these genetic modification of foods.
Yep.
And thanks to John Davies, we'll be the first elected official to introduce a resolution on June 27th. And that's at 6 p.m. You can testify under citizens' comments, a resolution 2013-26, a resolution expressing concerns about genetically modified foods and supporting labeling of all food products, ingredients, and seeds and other genetically modified foods. And 30 countries of our world have banned have ended this Monsanto from modifying our food. So we're just hoping that we can pack that place and give us 3 minutes to spout off.
Yeah, and if people do
I
go
just want
there,
to throw that out, and I think Stacey Pearson would be a great guest on your show.
We had her on Problem Corner, didn't we?
Yep.
Yeah.
Anyway, you guys have a great day. I hope your day goes fast, your evening slow.
Thanks, Frank. Appreciate that. All right, 458-TALK is the number. Good morning, caller. Who's this?
It is Grey Wolf.
Grey Wolf, what's on your mind?
Several things. I have an issue with y'all way back, but what I'm going to say right now is that we can make a difference with these judges, these lawyers, for some simple reason. Once you find the pattern of their treachery and their mistrust, or whatever you want to call it, then you take it to the school that they graduated law school from. You present it to them and show them how dishonorable and their ethics have been, and you can have their diploma revoked. Therefore, they cannot practice law in the state of Alaska without having a degree in law.
That's pretty interesting. Never thought about that one.
And it works with lawyers, judges, and even the Supreme Court judges.
You just have to convince the school then to revoke it.
Correct. And if the school doesn't want to do it, then you present it to the students and let the students uprise, because they're good at that.
Oh, heck yeah. We need a little bit more of that. No doubt. Well, that's a good idea. Appreciate that.
Thanks for the call, Grey Wolf. Appreciate that very much. 458-TALK is the number if you'd like to call and participate in the program today. Josh, did you hear the big fervor about the rapper Lil Wayne?
Lil Wayne?
Lil Wayne. He stepped on an American flag during his video shoot. This is great because this shows the idolatry, again, that we were talking about in the first hour, that is so prevalent in American culture now, where we see somebody putting a crucifix in a jar full of urine, and that's considered free speech. But if somebody steps on an American flag, people get all kinds of bent out of shape, including Christians, and think that something horrible ought to happen to this person. I can't read all of the lyrics to his song because they're not
family friendly.
No, they're not family friendly. But here's part of it. Yeah, my country 'tis of thee, sweet land of kill 'em all and let 'em die. God bless America, this so godless America. And this, by the way, is spelled with a K. America. So, yeah, I may not, or you may not appreciate Lil Wayne as an artist or his, style of dress or his salty speech, but at least think about the idea of what freedom of speech means. And, that goes back to the First Amendment. We've just illustrated here in the last 10 minutes how basically we do not have a Bill of Rights.
And freedom of speech is given is your right, and it basically is that even if it's salty and some people find it offensive, you still have the right to say it. That's it. If you don't like it, you turn off the radio, you walk away, you cover your ears. You don't use force to kill someone because you dislike what he says, dislike his opinions. What you were saying about Nazi Germany, this is just blowing my mind here, that you were talking about the Stasi, but I was thinking about when I said we're in 1933 Germany and through the whole Nazi regime there. Guess what? You stayed as pigs. There was a Nuremberg. And someday there might be another one. And you might be held accountable for what you've done, and saying that, well, I was told to do it, I was doing my duty, blah, blah, blah. No, sorry, ain't going to cut it. And we've already been established that there's a higher law.
Even if there's not a Nuremberg, there was never any trials for Rome. After Rome fell, the Caesars, the senators, those who were complicit in the rape and murder of virtually the entire known world, they were never held accountable for what they did on this earth. But that's something that we need to keep in mind as well, that someday, you statist pig, you will answer to the one who you are trying to take our loyalty from. You will answer to God. And you know what? You don't believe you're going to answer to God? Fine. Go ahead. Keep on sinning.
Yeah, we don't force people to believe that.
Go ahead and keep on doing what you're doing, man. I'm not gonna try to force you to bow down before my God. Why are you trying to force me to bow down before yours?
Because they're statist pigs.
Yeah, I think that is part
That's
of
my
it.
new favorite word.
You statist pig. 458-TALK is the number. Good morning, caller. Do you hate the state?
Hello, this is Steve.
Steve, do you hate the state?
Do I hate the state?
Come on.
I love my country, but I fear my leaders.
That's fine. That's hating the state.
Good enough.
Yeah, let's clarify real quick. We're not talking about the people.
And we're not talking about
the
Alaska.
country.
We're talking about the government.
The government. Institution of force, monopoly of violence, taxation, and killing.
Go ahead, Steve. What's on your mind today?
Anyway, I'm raising a few chickens. Now, I would like to think that I'm raising these chickens to be healthy food for me, but I find that a 40-pound bag of organic feed with no GMO grain in it is $14 more per bag than that without. Totally wrong that the courts have ruled that the cross-pollination from GMO fields to organic fields, you can sue the person with the heirloom grains he's raising for stealing the GMO characteristics because the wind blew some pollen over there.
Or maybe we should start suing beekeepers because their bees fly out uncontrolled and go to GMO fields and might take pollen over to natural fields. We need to sue them too.
It seems that the grain is getting so hard to get heirloom grain that the expense is almost doubled over the GMO products. It seems to me that the court should be ruling that these genetically engineered stuff is poisoning our heirloom seeds.
Well, the other reason... I'm sorry.
It really upsets me that I hear that the president of Monsanto Corporation has been appointed the Secretary of Agriculture.
Yep.
Now, if that
How surprising is that?
Yeah, and if that isn't a conflict of interest, I don't know what is.
There is no conflict of interest, though. It's in the interest of the state.
Exactly.
And one of the other reasons I was going to say, one of the reasons why that non-GMO is $14 a bag more is because the GMO food is government subsidized.
It's a government protected monopoly, or they're trying to make it one. It is a government privileged, government preference. I mean, you think about all the government friends that are working in Monsanto, all the people that work for Monsanto that have now been appointed to government positions.
Well, they get subsidized, though, so they can sell it cheaper because the government's giving them a little bit of handout under the table. Here you go, man.
And now the tremendous profits that this Monsanto is making and a few other companies involved are influencing our fishing. Just about every country in the world has 100 to 200 mile limit around it out in the ocean. Ours, well, we have a 2-mile limit. We have Japanese and other foreign countries, big processing vessels pulling drag nets that are 8 miles long, I heard the other day, eating up our fish right in front of our streams and rivers where our fish need to go to spawn. And that's why we don't have king salmon. It's closed in the Yukon. It's closed in Chitna. It's non-existent for years in Valdez to catch a king salmon. 3 years ago, I caught one, and Fish and Game personnel said it was the first king salmon caught in 5 years. Well, to their knowledge. And this is ridiculous that so much money is passing hands that we allow these things to happen. And where's our 100-mile limit? I mean, maybe their fish would have a chance if they weren't dragging nets right across the mouths of our rivers.
It's just more of the same thing. This is Steve, right?
Yeah, it's still
Steve.
Steve. Yeah.
It's more of the same thing, though. It's what is basically the United States is the greatest fraud and ripoff in the history of the whole world. Under every circumstance, what you're talking about with the fishing, it's a fraud where people are making money off our backs. Fishing industry is subsidized also, and it's just like what you were saying with Monsanto and the GMO foods. It's subsidized, it's fraud. They steal money from us through taxation and give to these big corporations. They do it all over the place, just like with the bank bailouts. It's all fraud. We have a great big gang of thieves. That's how you have to look at them. They're gangster, status pig thieves stealing from us.
Josh, you and I have a mutual friend who has been helping me to understand that one of the big issue here is not the corporation. It's the corporation's cooperation with government.
Mm-hmm.
That's the issue. Government doesn't protect us from the corporations. The corporation's thievery is caused primarily because of the government.
Yep.
The government invites the corporation to come in and do these things that the government is doing, the thievery. And then the government turns around and blames the corporation that they asked them to do it so that they can pass more laws and get more control.
Yep.
It's this cycle.
Mussolini would be so proud of the biggest fascist state that's ever been known to the world.
But it isn't something new. This isn't.
No.
I mean, Will in the last hour talked about going back to 1933. Well, that's when we started seeing it a lot of it falling into place.
Yeah.
But if you look at historically speaking, so much of this happened within the first 20 years of the American experiment.
Oh, yeah. The mercantilist.
The first 20 years of the American experiment, this stuff was happening, and it wasn't shot down because the Constitution protected it. And this is, people, you want to be a strict constitutionalist. Really? Do you even really know what that means? The issue is we are not protected by government, no matter what government you come up with.
This great experiment called America is the proof in the pudding. There's no such thing as limited government. There's no such thing as government protecting your privilege, your rights, and your property. There's no such thing.
Well, and if anything, what the American experiment has done has proven an immutable law that given power, and a man is going to use that power to his own advantage, and he is going to abuse his fellow man,
and it will corrupt him.
Exactly. And what the solution is, Josh, is not to come up with a better way of giving power to people.
No, it's having better people rule us.
No, no. The solution, I mean, we've talked about this over and over and over again, is to get rid of these machinations of the state.
Yep. I'm already sick of your listening to the guys calling into your show running for Senate next year or whatever. Can't even believe they're already starting. That's like
the
a year and a half away.
Last time I said it was the earliest, and it was, and this time it's even earlier. I swear to you, next time we're going to have the election, and the very next day, people are going to announce that they're running in 6 years.
Yep. What was it? Was it Meade Treadwell?
Yep, Meade
called
Treadwell.
And announced that he's running for. He's a statist pig, and he was trying to. Oh my word! He's trying to do the old props by bringing up Paul. What's his name? Rand Paul. And we got good folks in there like Rand Paul and blah blah. You're no Rand Paul.
Well,
you statist
the
pig.
Biggest reason for us to vote for him that he was giving on the radio show,
the family value,
was so that the Republicans could have the control.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about principle. It's about power. And if you are a Republican, you are buying into that.
Yeah, and you don't think that they won't abuse their power? Look at the last state convention and the rules and laws and people that were appointed by voting at that convention that the statist pigs just threw out because they didn't like it.
Exactly. And, and they tricked you into joining into their party.
Dirty rats.
And, they're telling you the best way you can participate is by coming out and being part of the solution. We
ought to sue them into oblivion and bankrupt the party.
Out of time. See you next time here on Patriots Lament. Have a great day.
660 AM, KFAR, Fairbanks.